August 30th, 1945. At Tsugi Air Base, Japan, General Douglas MacArthur descends the steps of his transport plane wearing no helmet, no body armor, and carrying a corncob pipe. It is a deliberate performance of contempt for danger, or rather, a deliberate performance of certainty that there is no danger. 50,000 armed Japanese soldiers are within 3 miles of where he is standing. MacArthur's aides had begged him to reconsider the optics. He ignored them entirely. What MacArthur saw when he looked at Japan that day was ruins. Tokyo had been firebombed so thoroughly that in some districts there was simply nothing left above ground. Not a wall, not a chimney, not a standing tree. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were still radiating. The merchant fleet that had connected Japan to its imported food and raw material supply was at the bottom of the Pacific. Industrial output had collapsed to roughly a third of pre-war levels. Millions of people were genuinely uncertain whether they would eat that winter. By 1968, 23 years later, Japan was the second largest economy on Earth. Not because of foreign aid, though the Marshall Plan equivalent existed, not because of natural resources, of which Japan has almost none, not because of geography, which is actively hostile to large-scale agriculture and has no major rivers suitable for inland transport. Japan rebuilt from absolute zero through a specific combination of decisions that produced the fastest sustained economic development in the recorded history of the modern world. America watched that reconstruction happen, largely because America made it happen, providing the security umbrella and the open market access that Japan needed to sell its way back to prosperity. What America did not do was notice the specific mechanism that was building Japanese industrial strength, because America, in 1950 and 1960 and 1970, did not need to notice. It already had everything. The question for 2025 is what happens when the country that had everything stops doing the things that built it, and whether the comparison to the country that had nothing and built it from scratch tells you anything useful about the distance between them now. Stay with me. The Japanese Reconstruction story is usually told as a story about hard work and national character. That framing is both true and insufficient. It explains the effort without explaining the architecture that directed the effort productively. 3 decisions, made in roughly the first decade of the occupation, shaped everything that followed. The first was the savings rate. Japanese households in the post-war period saved at rates that, by American standards, were almost incomprehensible. Between 20% and 25% of disposable income through much of the 1950s and 1960s. This was not purely cultural, though culture reinforced it. It was structural. The Japanese welfare state barely existed, which meant that households saving for retirement, for medical emergencies, for their children's education, had no choice but to accumulate financial reserves. Those reserves, deposited in the postal savings system and the commercial banks, became the capital that Japanese industry borrowed to invest in factories, equipment, and the technology acquisition that narrowed the gap with American manufacturing. The second was industrial policy. Mitai, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, made explicit decisions about which industries Japan would develop and in what sequence. Steel before cars, ships before electronics. The state directed capital toward industries with genuine long-term competitive potential, protected infant industries through the period when they were too small to survive open competition, and then gradually opened them to international competition once they were large enough to win. The policy was not perfect. It wasted capital in some sectors and distorted others, but it produced a manufacturing base of genuine world-class competitiveness in the industries it targeted. The third was education. Japan's post-war literacy rate and basic numeracy were already high, a legacy of Meiji-era investment in mass education that predated the war. What the post-war period added was a university system oriented toward a technical and engineering education, producing the engineers and managers that industrial scale-up required, at the volumes that industrial scale-up required. None of these 3 decisions required natural resources. None required geographic advantages. All 3 required the political will to delay consumption across a period of 2 decades, where the payoff was genuinely uncertain, and the sacrifice was genuinely real. Now here is America. And I want to be clear that the contrast I am drawing is not a simple story of decline. It is a specific story about what happens when the decisions that built prosperity are reversed one by one in ways that feel entirely reasonable at each individual step. America's savings rate in the 1950s was roughly 10% of disposable income. In the 1980s, as financial deregulation made credit more accessible and consumer culture more dominant, it fell towards 6%. In the 1990s and 2000s, as home equity became a substitute for financial savings in many households' mental accounting, it fell further, briefly going negative in 2005 and 2006 as Americans borrowed against inflated house prices to fund consumption. It has recovered somewhat since, sitting around 4 to 5% currently, but remains well below the rates that historically characterize periods of genuine capital formation. Industrial policy in America was, for most of the post-war period, The thing that sophisticated people said other countries did, and America didn't need to do. The market would allocate capital to its most productive uses. The government's job was to maintain competition and stay out of the way. The logic was coherent for an economy that already had world-leading industries in virtually every sector. It became less coherent as those industries were displaced by Japan in the 1980s, by China in the 2000s, without any domestic policy framework oriented toward building replacement competitive capacity. The Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act of 2022 represent America's first serious attempt at explicit industrial policy in roughly half a century. Both are real, both are significant, both are also in the context of decades of deindustrialization and the loss of manufacturing supply chains that took a generation to build, late. Japan built its semiconductor industry over 20 years of patient, state-directed investment, starting from nothing. America is attempting to rebuild manufacturing capacity in an economy where the workforce, the supplier networks, the institutional knowledge, and the infrastructure that supported mid-century manufacturing have been substantially degraded. Now here's the critical part: education. The United States in the 1950s and 1960s led the world in the proportion of its population with university education and in the quality of its technical and scientific research institutions. That lead was genuine, and it was significant. What it disguised was the degree to which American higher education was becoming oriented toward consumption rather than production, toward credential attainment as a marker of social status rather than toward the technical and engineering education that builds industrial competitiveness. American university enrollment expanded enormously from the 1970s onward, but the composition shifted away from the STEM fields that build industrial economies toward social sciences, business administration, and humanities. The result was a generation of credential holders who borrowed heavily for degrees whose skills the manufacturing economy doesn't need. Japan trained engineers. America trained managers of a system it was quietly dismantling. Japan in 1950 had a simple, urgent, shared understanding that certain skills, engineering, metallurgy, chemistry, manufacturing management, were the skills the country needed to survive. There was no ambiguity about what education was for. It was for producing the people who would rebuild the country. Here is the dimension of this comparison that makes it more than just a story about economic policy, the specific role that the starting point plays in the decisions that follow. Japan in 1945 had the advantage, if it can be called that, of having lost everything. The destruction was so complete that there was no incumbent industry to protect, no existing capital structure to preserve, no interest group defending the status quo. Decisions that would have been politically impossible in an intact economy, restructuring entire industries, directing capital away from existing winners toward emerging ones, were possible in post-war Japan precisely because the existing winners were all gone. America's challenge is the inverse. It is trying to rebuild industrial capacity inside an economy where the financial sector directs capital toward financial engineering rather than physical engineering, and where decades of consumption-oriented growth have shaped infrastructure, real estate, and cultural habits around spending rather than building. The political interests defending that arrangement are well-funded and deeply entrenched. The interests that would benefit from a different arrangement are not. The Japanese Reconstruction was politically easy in the specific sense that the politics of the old economy had been bombed away. The American rebuilding is politically hard in the specific sense that the politics of the existing economy are very much alive and very well funded. This is not an argument that America cannot rebuild. It is an argument about the specific difficulty, the political and institutional friction that makes the American version of Japan's post-war reconstruction a fundamentally different challenge than the original. Here is what the numbers show about where the two economies stand relative to each other in 2025. Japan took 23 years to go from the ruins of 1945 to the second largest economy in the world. It did it by saving at 20% of income, directing that savings into productive industrial investment, and educating the engineers and managers those industries required. America's manufacturing share of GDP has fallen from roughly 28% in 1953 to approximately 11% today. Its savings rate is a quarter of what Japan's was during its reconstruction. Its federal debt is 124% of GDP. Its annual interest payments exceed its defense budget. The infrastructure report card from the American Society of Civil Engineers gives the country's physical infrastructure a C-, meaning that the physical foundation on which a rebuilding effort would rest is itself in need of rebuilding. Japan had nothing and built everything in 23 years. America had everything and has been running it down for roughly 50. The comparison is not meant to be hopeless. Japan's reconstruction is genuinely one of the most remarkable economic achievements in human history, and it is a proof of concept that starting from nothing is not a permanent condition. The question is whether the political and institutional machinery required to make the decisions Japan made is available inside the American system as it currently functions. Japan made those decisions under occupation with a rebuilt political system, starting from zero. America would need to make them voluntarily, with an intact political system, starting from a position of entrenched incumbent interests that benefit from the current arrangement. That is the distance between them. It is not geological, but it is real. This channel exists to measure that distance honestly. MacArthur stood at Atsugi in August 1945 and looked at a country that had nothing. What Japan built from that nothing, in 23 years, with no resources, no allies, no starting capital, is the most powerful argument in modern economic history that the starting point is not the determining factor. What America is doing with its starting point, the largest economy in history, the world's reserve currency, the most powerful military ever assembled, the most innovative private sector ever produced, is a different argument, one that is still being written. Subscribe if you want to keep watching it being written before the conclusion is reached. And I want your argument in the comments. Japan rebuilt from zero, partly because the destruction removed the political obstacles that would have blocked the necessary decisions in an intact economy. Does America need an equivalent crisis to clear the political obstacles to rebuilding, or is there a path that doesn't require that kind of clearing? Drop your answer below. The most interesting argument gets pinned.